Okay, so this is the 7th video lecture, and in this one I really want to talk specifically about gender identity theory, or sometimes it's called gender formation theory. But in the previous lecture I was talking about the difference, what gender means, right? So gender is our way of being, and our gender identity is when a person comes to recognize what my gender is. That would be your identity, and then theoretically they interact or engage in the world based on that self-identified gender, right? So there are a variety, there are a handful of different theories as to how this develops, how one's gender identity develops. So like one of them, the biological explanation, basically says that our gender, this one really ties our gender with our sex. So the way that we think about our place in the world is sort of tied up with the way our biology works. And so the biological theory says that because we start off female, all of us in the womb, and then we are exposed to androgens and in a fetal stage, and this causes the body to masculinize because we're all starting off female. And so this theory says that our gender identity, the way we think of ourselves, is influenced in some cases in the womb, and the way that our brain forms. And there are instances where a fetus is not responsive to the androgens. So because we start off both a female, and the androgen is what causes our brain to begin, and our body to masculinize, if for whatever reason we have a genetic resistance to androgens, then we may not develop the theory is that the brain structures that would make us identify as male don't form, or as I say, androgen exposed females, right? So that's the theory, is that there's something in the brain development that isn't consistent with a male body or a female body. Evolutionary theory argues that the way that we identify as male or female has its origins in our physiological role in reproduction. And so a boy will mimic the dominant male behaviors of the group. So the idea goes like this, is that women's relationship to reproduction, because she grows the baby inside her, and she literally is more physiological invested in the offspring, that she will develop a certain set of ways of being, including like nurturing and things that will promote the successful development and the successful survival of her offspring. Men, on the other hand, have such a limited contribution to reproduction, right? I mean, their contribution can literally be a few grams of sperm in only a few minutes, that their ways are really more about like dominance over other men for access to the women. So men don't have to be as nurturing because men really are supposed to be the protectors and play that role. So there's also an interesting theory about this has to do with how long relationships last. And the theory goes is that a relationship will really only or monogamy lasts as long as it takes for a baby to go from being carried around on the hip to once a child can walk independently alongside. Now women start looking for other partners. You figure that's 3, 4, 5 years, and in fact we see this in the data that marriages break up often at these 5 years. And so the theory is that because evolutionarily it's better for evolution to have more genetic variation, that evolutionarily we're programmed not to be monogamous for the long term, right? But to maximize our genetic variation. The psychoanalytical perspective, now this is Freud's theory, and it's basically based on this idea of gender identification. And the notion is that once a child recognizes that they are a boy like their dad, well, wait a second, let me back up. And that's not, it's gender identification theory, but it's, fiddlesticks, I should have, so it's this notion of what we call penis envy, that little boys want to be in relationship with their mother the same way that their father is. And so, like, if you think of a child, a little boy may say when he grows up to marry his mother, or a little girl may say when she grows up to marry her father. And because a little boy wants the affection, if you will, of the mother, then the little boy sort of wants to get the father figure out of the way. The opposite is similarly true, that the girl wants access. In this case, like in Freud's model, it was often characterized as sexual access. The girl wants sexual access to the father. Now, boys then are noticed that girls don't have penises, and they fear, so what we call castration anxiety, right? And they fear being castrated, where girls, on the other hand, are envious of boys' penises, so they want access to men because men have penises and girls want access to those penises. I did not do a very good job of explaining that sort of theory, and I really struggle with boiling down all of Freud's theories to some of these more sort of wackadoodle ideas about sexuality and identification. But he does, his explanations for gender relationships do very often boil down to some sort of, I'll just sort of leave it at that. Maybe in another lecture I can do a better job of explaining it. Cognitive theory says that the way that we have to develop cognitively a understanding, we call gender schemas, and we make observations about boys and girls, and then we kind of put those observations in these, if you will, like little baskets or schemas, right? Girls do this. Girls wear skirts. Girls play with dolls. Boys wear pants. Boys play with trucks. I have been told I'm a girl. I've learned that I'm a girl, and girls play with dolls. If I play with trucks, I might become a boy, and I'm not a boy, I'm a girl, so I play with dolls and wear pink. And that really is, my identity is I'm a girl. This is what girls do, without any sort of, it's kind of straightforward, but it's what we would call a cognitive shortcut, that we summarize all of these observations. Here would be sort of I guess it's kind of an example. When my children were growing up, my husband did all the cooking in the kitchen, and I think I may have mentioned this in a previous lecture, I don't know, and we were on a vacation with my in-laws, and with my sister-in-law, my brother-in-law, and in their family, my sister-in-law, Bonnie, was very traditional. She stayed at home and she did all the cooking, and my daughter says to me, "Mom, does Aunt Bonnie cook?" And I was like, "Well, of course Aunt Bonnie cooks." And she says, "Well, I thought only boys cooked." Her schema was that boys do the cooking, and so when we were hanging out with her aunt and her uncle, that violated her schema, and so she had to figure out, like, wait a second, this is not consistent. She loves to cook now. I wonder sometimes if she thought that only boys cooked, if she'd still really like to cook. I don't know, right? But this one, so a schema is attached to identity. And then social learning theory is the idea that the way we learn about gender is through observation and reinforcement, right? So we see our parents tell us, the media tells us, our teachers tell us, this is how boys are supposed to be, this is how girls are supposed to be, and then when I act in accordance to my gender, I'm reinforced for that. I'm rewarded or I'm punished. So a good example would be if Tommy is playing with his football and his dad comes home and plays football with Tommy, and right on, son. As opposed to if Tommy is wearing dresses and wearing makeup, and his father comes home and throws a fit. What are you doing, right? Tommy has learned, did I say Tommy? He has learned that it's acceptable to act like this. He gets rewarded. He's punished if he acts like this. So when folks today are kind of talking about grooming, as if children are being molded to this non-binary, this is kind of what they're alluding alluding to. They're suggesting that somehow parents are influencing their gender roles, and of course parents influence their gender roles. All of society, all of environments influence our gender roles, but this idea of social cognitive theory, right, says that, well, it probably should be its own little pearl over here. Social cognitive theory says that we learn gender through observation and thinking, and so our brains have to be at a certain level of cognitive development to conceptualize even that kind of behavior is a gendered behavior, instead of like we have to be observant enough and to recognize that cooking is something I have observed girls doing more than I've observed boys doing. And our brains got to be able to sort that out and see the patterns. So somewhere in here, I think I ask you, and I hope you will refer to the textbook too, but I ask you to indicate or which of these theories, and maybe hopefully I've done a mediocre job of sort of explaining the difference. Which of these theories makes the most sense to you? Do you think that boys and girls act the way they do because our body is made that way? Do you think there has anything to do with our evolutionary role in reproduction and these patterns are ancient through all of ancient humans? Maybe it has something to do with our psychoanalytical. We've identified with a woman. We've identified with the female in the house. We've identified with the male in the house. Maybe we have created these schemas, right? And children just see this is how boys are and this is how girls are. Or maybe it has something to do with social learning, and children have been rewarded or punished and reinforced for acting a certain way. And the messages in our TV and our books and these kinds of things. Okay, that's taken me 12 whole minutes, and I'm going to stop right there.